Hana had practiced her speech 47 times on the shuttle ride to the council station. She had memorized every word, every pause, every small smile she would offer at the right moment. She wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no symbols of war, just a woman standing for her world. The Grand Hall of the Galaxy Council was the largest room she had ever seen. It stretched upward like the inside of a mountain, with hundreds of balconies carved into the walls, but each one holding representatives of a different species. Some were tall and thin like glass, some were wide and covered in plates of bone, some floated in liquid tanks. Some had no bodies at all and appeared only as shifting lights. 412 spacefaring civilizations, all watching her from above. She stood alone on the speaking platform at the center. The light above her was cold and white. She could hear her own heartbeat. "My name is Hana," she began. Her voice was steady. I speak on behalf of Earth and all human colonies. We come to this council not as conquerors, not as beggars, but as neighbors. We have recently achieved faster-than-light travel. We wish to open trade. We wish to exchange knowledge. We wish to exist beside you in peace." She paused and looked around the hall. Most of the faces she could not read. Alien expressions were difficult. But she had studied enough to know that the silence was not respect. It was amusement. The elder Puvo sat at the highest balcony, directly above her. He was Maelari, nearly 3 meters tall, with pale blue skin that was thin enough to see the slow pulse of light beneath it. He was over 900 years old. He had led the council for the last 2 centuries, and in all that time, no species had ever surprised him. He raised one long hand, and Hana stopped speaking. "We have reviewed your world," Puvo said. His voice filled the hall without effort. A projection appeared behind Hana. Images of Earth, wars, burning forests, pollution clouds over cities, plastic floating in oceans, borders drawn and redrawn in blood. Laughter began somewhere on the left side of the hall. It spread quickly, a deep rumbling from one balcony, a high clicking sound from another, a wet gurgling from somewhere above. 400 species, each laughing in their own way, but all laughing at the same thing. Puvo let it continue for a long time before he spoke again. "You are short-lived creatures," he said. "Your average lifespan is less than one of our calendar cycles. You fight among yourselves constantly. You poison your own air and water. You have had faster-than-light travel for less than a generation." He tilted his head slowly. "What exactly do you believe you can offer us?" Hana opened her mouth to respond, but Puvo was already waving his hand again. The council classifies your species as level 2 minor. You will be observed. You will not be contacted. You may continue to exist in your small cluster of stars, provided you do not interfere with civilized space." From a lower balcony, a younger Milari named Talsi leaned forward. She had spent 3 years studying human history, not the wars, but the recoveries, how they rebuilt after every disaster, how they adapted to deserts, frozen wastelands, ocean floors, how they sent machines to other planets before they could even leave their own atmosphere, just because they wanted to see what was there. "Elder," Talsi said carefully, "I believe a deeper review of human adaptive capacity may be warranted. Their biological resilience and social recovery patterns are quite—" "Noted," Puvo said without looking at her, "and dismissed." Talsi sat back. She folded her hands in her lap and said nothing more, but she kept watching Hana. Hana was escorted out of the hall by 2 Venari guards who did not speak to her and did not look at her. She walked between them with her back straight and her face calm. She did not cry. She did not argue. She thanked them politely when they brought her to the shuttle dock. On the shuttle back to the Baeko, she sat in the co-pilot seat and stared at the stars for a long time. Taiho was waiting for her in the captain's chair. He did not ask immediately. He let her breathe. "They laughed!" Hana said finally. Her voice was quiet but not broken. All of them. 400 species, and not one of them spoke for us. They showed pictures of our wars, our pollution, our worst moments, and they laughed. Taiho nodded slowly. He was not a man who showed anger on his face. He had grown up farming on a colony world where the soil had to be rebuilt by hand, season after season. Patience was not something he practiced. It was something he was made of. So what did they classify us as? He asked. Level 2 minor, galactic wildlife basically. No trade, no diplomacy, no seat. Taiho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Good. Let them laugh. We don't need their permission to exist. Hana looked at him. You're not angry? I'm furious, he said calmly. But anger is only useful if you do something with it. He pressed the calm button on the armrest. Jinseo, come to the bridge. A few minutes later, the ship's head engineer arrived. Jinseo was thin, with dark circles under his eyes and grease on his fingers that never fully washed off. He had already taken apart half the alien navigation buoy they had passed on the way in and rebuilt it to work 30% faster. Taiho looked at him. You know that list of alien technologies you've been begging me to let you study? Jinseo's eyes lit up. Yes. The project starts now. I want everything. Their engines, their shields, their weapons, their communication systems. You'd take them apart, learn how they work, then make them better. Jinseo grinned. What are we calling it? Taiho thought for a moment. Yom-Yong, he said. Dawn. Hana looked out the window at the council station growing smaller behind them. Somewhere in that enormous structure, 400 species had already forgotten about the small human woman in the dark suit. That was their first mistake. 30 years passed, and the galaxy forgot about humans. That was exactly what Taiho wanted. But in those 30 years, humanity spread quietly across 12 star systems. They did not announce their colonies. They did not send messages to the council. They built settlements on worlds that nobody else wanted. Rocky planets with thin air, frozen moons with underground rivers, stations hidden inside asteroid fields. They chose places that were hard to live in because humans had always been good at living in hard places. Jinseo was no longer a young man with grease on his fingers. Then he was the head of a division of 4,000 engineers spread across 6 worlds. His hair had turned gray. His back hurt when he stood too long. But his mind was sharper than ever, and the things he had built in 30 years would have terrified the Galaxy Council if they had been paying attention. Project Yom-Yong had been a complete success. Human engineers had taken apart every piece of alien technology they could find, bought, borrowed, or quietly collected from abandoned stations and junk fields. They studied it. They understood it. And then, as Taiho had asked, they made it better. The standard FTL drive used by most council species could push a ship to about 40 times the speed of light. Jinseo's latest design could reach 70. It used less fuel. It was smaller. And it was almost completely silent on sensors, a feature Jinseo had added not because anyone asked, but because he thought it was interesting. Now that accidental invention turned out to be one of the most important things humanity ever built. Yuna had used those 30 years just as well. She was now the architect of humanity's entire defense network, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Most species built their military around a central fleet, a massive collection of warships stationed at the capital, ready to respond to threats. Yuna did the opposite. Every human colony could defend itself. And every colony had its own fleet, its own shield grid, its own weapon platforms. There was no central command to destroy, no capital to besiege, no single leader whose death would cause collapse. Yuna had studied every galactic war in recorded history, thousands of them, and she had found the same pattern over and over. Big empires built big fleets gathered in one place, One decisive battle destroyed the fleet, and the Empire fell. "We will never give them that battle," she told Taiho. "If they come for us, they will have to fight all of us everywhere at the same time, and we will not fight the way they expect." Human ships were fast, small, and hard to detect. Human tactics relied on speed, surprise, and adaptation. Yuna trained her officers not to follow rigid plans, but to think on their feet, to change strategy mid-battle, to exploit any weakness the moment it appeared. It was messy, it was chaotic, and it was terrifying to fight against. While Jinseo built and Yuna planned, Hana worked in the shadows. She had created something she simply called the network, a web of human traders, freelancers, wanderers, and drifters scattered across alien space. They took small jobs, they repaired ships, they sold food and medicine at low prices. They were friendly, harmless, and everywhere, and they listened. Every piece of useful information, troop movements, political shifts, trade disputes, new technologies flowed back to Hana through encrypted channels hidden inside ordinary trade transmissions. No alien species noticed because no alien species was looking. Humans were level 2 minor, galactic wildlife. Why would anyone watch them? Dowan had taken a different path. He had left the Beko years ago to run a medical outpost on a border colony called Geomun Station. It was a rough place, a crossroads where species from a dozen worlds came to trade, hide, or start over. And Dowan treated everyone. He did not ask where they came from. He did not ask what they had done. He healed broken bones, cured infections, and sat with dying patients who had no one else. Word spread slowly. A Venari deserter told a Milari refugee who told a traitor from the outer systems. Dowan's clinic became a place where the galaxy's forgotten people came for help. And in return, without Dowan ever asking, they gave him something priceless: trust. My alien species that hated each other sat in the same waiting room because they all trusted the quiet human doctor who never turned anyone away. On the council station, Talsi had risen slightly in rank. She now had her own small office and the authority to write official reports. She wrote a second analysis of humanity, more detailed than her first. She noted their expansion speed, their unusual ship signatures, their growing presence in border systems. She calculated their probable technological level based on trade patterns and concluded that they were advancing far faster than any level 2 species in recorded history. She submitted the report to Elder Puvo's office. A clerk read the first page, stamped it as low priority, and put it in a storage file where it would never be read. But Commander Locke of the Venari Dominion was more careful. But her border sensors had been picking up strange readings for months, ships that appeared on scanners for a few seconds and then vanished. They were too fast to track, too quiet to identify. Her analysts told her they were probably sensor errors. Locke did not believe in sensor errors. She pulled the data and ran it herself. The ghost signals always appeared near human trade routes. They moved in patterns that suggested purpose, not randomness. Someone was testing her borders, or learning her patrol schedules, mapping her blind spots. She filed a request with the Council for permission to investigate human space. The request was denied. Puvo's office sent back a single line. Humans are a level 2 minor species. They are not a security concern. Loka sat in her command chair and read that line 3 times. Then she opened a private channel to her most trusted intelligence officer. "Start a file on the humans," she said. "Everything you can find. I want to know what they are building out there." The officer hesitated. "Commander, the Council has classified them as—" "I know what the Council has classified them as," Loka said. "I also know that my sensors cannot find their ships. Species that build invisible ships are not wildlife." She closed the channel. On the border, another ghost signal appeared for 2 seconds, and then was gone. In the silence of human space, 12 worlds worked and built and prepared. They did not shout. They did not threaten. They simply grew stronger every single day, and no one in the galaxy thought to stop them. That was the galaxy's second mistake. Maro Drift was the kind of place the galaxy pretended did not exist. It was an old mining station on the edge of Venari-controlled space, long abandoned by any honest industry, and now home to traders, smugglers, gamblers, and anyone else who needed a place where nobody asked questions. The lights were always dim, and the air always smelled like engine coolant and cheap food. Laws existed on paper, but not in practice. 12 humans had stopped there to refuel and trade. They were ordinary people, freighter crews, mechanics, a pilot named Sujin, who was only 23, and still sent messages to her mother back on Geomon Station every week. They had no weapons beyond the standard tools every spacer carried. They were not soldiers. They were not spies. They were just people trying to make a living on the edge of civilized space. The Venari patrol found them in a docking bay on the station's lower level. 20 armed soldiers in dark armor, led by a lieutenant who had received his orders directly from Commander Locke. The orders were simple. Detain any humans found in Venari border space. Study them. Learn what they are. The lieutenant told the 12 humans they were being taken into custody under Galactic Security Code 41, a law that allowed the detainment of unclassified fauna found in restricted zones. He said it with a straight face. Under galactic law, humans were animals, and animals could be captured and held without cause. Sujin asked if they could contact their people. The lieutenant said no. She asked if they had the right to a hearing. The lieutenant said animals do not get hearings. One of the older traders, a man named Byung-ho, put his hand on Sujin's shoulder and shook his head. Not now. Not here. She clenched her jaw and said nothing more. They were taken to a detention block on the upper level of the station. The cells were small and cold. The food was a gray paste that tasted like wet paper. The Venari guards watched them through glass walls, taking notes on their behavior the way scientists watch creatures in a cage. Commander Locke reviewed the operation from her flagship. She expected the humans to react the way most species did when captured: panic, isolation, despair. Weaker species curled up and went silent. Aggressive species attacked the walls until they exhausted themselves. Either way, they broke. The humans did neither. Within the first day, they organized. Byung-ho, the oldest, became the group's voice. He kept everyone calm. He made sure food was shared equally, or even though some cells received more than others. Sujin memorized the guard rotation: 12 guards, 3 shifts, 8 hours each, with a 4-minute gap during shift changes when the corridor was empty. A young engineer named Yoonji figured out that the ventilation system connected all 12 cells. They could talk to each other through the vents. By the second night, they had established a communication schedule. They shared information. They shared jokes. One of them, a cook named Pilsu, I spent 20 minutes describing in perfect detail how to make his grandmother's dumpling soup, and for those 20 minutes, every single one of them forgot where they were. The Venari guards were confused. Their prisoners were not breaking. They were laughing. They were telling stories. They were keeping track of time by counting guard shifts and scratching marks into the wall. One guard reported to Locke that the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. Locke did not find this funny. On the Baeko, Taiho received the message through Hana's network. A trader on Maro Drift had seen the arrests and passed the information to a contact, who passed it to another contact, who passed it to Hana within 6 hours. Taiho read the report once. He did not read it again. He called Yuna to the bridge. 12 of our people, he said. Maro Drift, Venari detention. Yuna looked at the station's layout on the tactical screen, and she had already pulled the blueprints from Hana's intelligence files. When do you want them back? Yesterday. Yuna nodded. Give me 72 hours. She assembled a strike team of 30 operators, the best from 3 different colonies. They trained for 2 days on a mock-up of the detention block that Jinseo's team built in a cargo bay. They practiced the approach 17 times until every step took exactly as long as it needed to and not 1 second more. On the 3rd night, the 3 human ships dropped out of FTL behind Morrow Drift's sensor shadow, a blind spot in the station's detection grid that Hana's network had mapped 2 years earlier. The ships were running silent. No engine signatures, no heat output. They were invisible. The strike team entered through a maintenance hatch on the station's underside. They moved in pairs through service tunnels that were too narrow for Venari soldiers in full armor. Yuna had chosen the tunnels for exactly that reason. At exactly the moment of the guard shift change, that 4-minute gap Sujin had identified from inside her cell, the team reached the detention block. They cut power to the corridor. They opened the cells using override codes that Jinseo had cracked from a stolen Venari security module. The 12 prisoners were out and moving within 90 seconds. Sujin did not need to be told what to do. She grabbed Byung-ho's arm and ran. Not a single shot was fired. And not a single person, human or Venari, was seriously hurt. The Venari guards woke up locked inside the same cells that had held the humans, with their weapons neatly disassembled and stacked in perfect rows beside them. A small note left on top of one weapon stack read, "All parts accounted for." On Locke's personal terminal, a message appeared. It had no sender ID, no return signal. Just 5 words from Taiho. "Our people. I do not touch." Loka sat alone in her command room and replayed the station's internal footage. She watched the human team move through her station like water through cracks in stone. Fluid, silent, and perfectly coordinated. They had entered, extracted 12 prisoners, neutralized her guards without a single casualty, and vanished in under 8 minutes. She had fought 9 species in her career. She had commanded fleets that burned worlds. And she had never, in all her years, I was silent when it ended. Was silent when it ended. I have submitted a formal request to the Council to reclassify humanity as a Level 1 strategic threat, she said. I expect it will be denied. It does not matter. From this moment, I want a dedicated task force, full intelligence, full surveillance. Everything we can gather. One of her officers spoke carefully. Commander, with respect, it was only 12 prisoners, a small raid on a border station. Is this level of response really? You are not listening, Loka said. Her voice was cold and very quiet. I have fought 9 species. Every one of them, when they fight to win. They calculate cost against gain, and they retreat when the numbers turn against them. She pointed at the frozen image on the screen, a human operator carrying an injured traitor on her back while still covering the hallway with her free hand. These humans do not fight to win. They fight like they cannot accept losing. There is a difference, and if you do not understand that difference, you will not survive what is coming. The room was very quiet. On the council station, and Talsi accessed the classified report through channels she was not supposed to have. She watched the footage of the Morrow Drift operation 3 times. She watched the humans move through the corridors. She watched them carry each other. She watched them leave the guards alive and unharmed. She leaned back in her chair and whispered to the empty room. I told you. Nobody heard her. But soon, the whole galaxy would. The Venari fleet arrived at Pale Star on a Tuesday, and 80 warships dropped out of FTL in perfect formation, a wall of dark metal and glowing engines that stretched across the sky like a second horizon. Each ship was massive, built for dominance, designed to make any species that saw them understand immediately that resistance was a waste of time. They had crushed rebellions on 6 worlds with formations like this. Most species surrendered before the first shot was fired. Pale Star was humanity's outermost colony. It was a small world, cold. rocky, with thin air and pale white soil that gave it its name. 200,000 people lived there, most of them researchers, miners, and their families. It had schools. It had parks built inside pressurized domes where children played under artificial sunlight. It had a bakery run by an old woman named Migyeong who made bread that people traveled from 3 settlements to buy. It was not a military target. It was a home. Commander Locke stood on the bridge of her flagship and broadcast her message on all frequencies. Her voice was calm and precise. "This is Commander Locke of the Venari Dominion, acting under the authority of the Galaxy Council. The human colony designated Pale Star is hereby ordered to surrender all military assets, dismantle all defensive systems, and submit to Council authority. You have 12 hours to comply. Resistance will be met with total force." She expected the humans to panic, and she expected calls for negotiation, pleas for mercy, frantic messages to their other colonies begging for help. She had seen it dozens of times before. Instead, she received a single reply from the colony's governor, a woman named Ji-yeon. The message was 4 words long: "We are not leaving." Taiho was 4 systems away when the news reached the Baiko. He was already moving before the message finished playing. He opened a channel to Yuna, who was on a training station 2 systems in the other direction. "How long can Pale Star hold?" he asked. Yuna had designed the colony's defenses herself. She knew every gun emplacement, every shield generator, every drone bay hidden in the hills outside the settlements. Against 80 ships, if they fight smart and don't waste ammunition, they can hold for 1 week. Maybe 10 days. "I need 5, Taiho said. "Can you get the fleet to Rally Point Nuri in 5 days? 4, Yuna said, and cut the channel. The siege began at dawn on the 2nd day. Locke sent her first assault wave, 20 ships targeting the colony's orbital defense platforms. She expected to destroy them in minutes. The defense grid lit up like a living thing. Jin Seo had designed it years ago, and it was his masterpiece. A network of overlapping weapons platforms, shield generators, and automated drone swarms that thought faster than any crew could react. The platforms did not just shoot back, but seconds. 6 Venari ships were destroyed seconds. 6 Venari ships were destroyed in the first 20 minutes. Locke pulled her fleet back and stared at the tactical display in silence. On the ground, Dowen worked without stopping. He had arrived on Pale Star 3 months earlier to help set up a new medical facility. Now that facility was a field hospital, and the first wounded were already coming in. Civilians hurt by debris from orbital strikes that had gotten through the shield gaps. He moved between beds with steady hands and a calm voice. A young boy with a cut on his forehead asked Dowen if the aliens were going to kill them. Dowen cleaned the cut, put a bandage on it, and said, "Not today." Governor Ji-yeon coordinated the ground defense from a command bunker buried deep under the main settlement. She was not a soldier. She was an administrator who had spent most of her career managing mining permits and water rights. But she had prepared for this possibility because Yuna had insisted that every colony governor train for siege scenarios. The colony militia held defensive positions that had been built into the settlement's design from the very beginning. Streets were angled to create overlapping fields of fire. Buildings had reinforced basements that connected through tunnels. Every park and every plaza, every intersection had been quietly designed with defense in mind. Pale Star did not just have walls, it was a wall. Locke realized this on the 3rd day when she sent ground troops to test the colony's surface defenses. Her soldiers advanced through what they expected to be civilian streets and walked into a killing ground. The humans fought from buildings, from tunnels, from positions that appeared and vanished like smoke. But Locke's ground commander reported that the entire colony seemed to be designed as a single weapon. While bombs fell on Pale Star, Hana activated every node in her network. Within hours, unedited footage of the siege was streaming across alien communication channels in 4 sectors. The footage showed Venari warships firing on a colony with schools and bakeries. It showed children being carried to shelters. It showed Doan treating wounded civilians while the ceiling shook above him. The public opinion moved fast. 3 minor council species formally protested the siege. A Milari news service ran the footage with the headline questioning whether the council had authorized an attack on civilians. Traders in 12 systems refused to refuel Venari ships. Elder Puvo was forced to call an emergency council session. For the first time, he faced real questions about his decision to ignore humanity. On the 5th day, Taiho arrived. His fleet was not large, and 40 ships, exactly half of what Locke had. But every single one of them was a product of 30 years of Project Yomyong. They were faster, they were quieter, and they carried weapons that Locke had never seen before. Jinseo called them adaptive pulse cannons. They fired energy bursts that shifted frequency with every shot, cycling through patterns so fast that no shield system could adjust in time. He had gotten the idea from watching ocean waves. No 2 waves were exactly the same, and neither were his weapons. Taiho did not announce his arrival. He did not broadcast a warning. His fleet dropped out of FTL inside Locke's formation, between her ships, behind her ships, above and below her ships, and opened fire before the Venari sensors had finished identifying them. The battle lasted 3 hours. It was not elegant. Human ships took damage. 2 were destroyed. Crews died, but the Venari fleet, built for overwhelming force against predictable enemies, he could not handle an opponent that moved like a swarm of insects. Fast, unpredictable, everywhere at once. Yuna commanded the tactical coordination from the Bejos Bridge. She did not give detailed orders. She gave her captains objectives and trusted them to find their own way. When one group was pinned down, another appeared from an unexpected angle. When the Venari concentrated their fire, the human ships scattered and reformed somewhere else. There was no pattern to predict, and no formation to break, no center to destroy. Loka fought with everything she had. She was brilliant, and her crews were brave. But by the end of the 3rd hour, she had lost 34 ships. The rest were damaged. Her flagship was burning on 3 decks. She gave the order to retreat. On her bridge, surrounded by smoke and the sound of failing systems, she opened a channel to the council. Her face was burned on one side. Her voice was hoarse, but her words were very clear. So reclassify them, now, before it is too late. The channel closed. The Venari fleet limped away into FTL, leaving behind wreckage and silence. On Pale Star, Dowan stepped outside the field hospital for the first time in 5 days. The sky was full of debris trails, bright lines of fire where destroyed ships were falling through the atmosphere, burning up before they reached the ground. It looked almost beautiful. Migyeong, the old baker, walked up to him carrying a tray. She had been baking in her shelter the entire time the siege lasted, using emergency flour and recycled water. She held out a piece of bread to Dowan. "Eat," she said. "You look terrible." He took the bread. It was warm. He sat down on the steps of the hospital and ate it slowly while the sky burned above him. On the council station, Elder Puvo sat alone in his private chamber and watched the battle footage. He watched human ships appear from nowhere, but he watched them fight with a fury and creativity that his tactical analysts could not model or predict. He watched Loka's fleet, the finest in the Venari Dominion, break apart and run. His hands were trembling. He had not trembled in 400 years. For the first time in his ancient life, Puvo was afraid of something small. 1 year after the siege of Pale Star, the galaxy was a different place. The news had traveled fast, faster than any fleet, faster than any weapon. And the story of a small human colony holding off 80 Venari warships had spread through every trade route, every market, every bar and meeting hall, from the core systems to the outer rim. It was told differently depending on who was telling it. Some versions exaggerated, some left things out. But the core of the story was always the same. The Galaxy Council had called humans harmless, and the humans had proven them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Not 12 species had already opened independent trade negotiations with humanity. They did not wait for council permission. They did not ask Puvo's opinion. They simply sent representatives to human colonies and said, "We would like to talk." 5 of those 12 had gone further and signed mutual defense pacts, formal agreements that bound them to fight alongside humanity if either side was attacked. The council was fracturing. For 10,000 years, the Milari had held the center of galactic politics through a simple formula. They were the oldest, the most advanced, and the most connected. Every species owed them something. Every trade route passed through their influence. Every dispute was settled in their hall under their rules. But now, for the first time, species were building relationships that did not include the Milari at all. To human technology, shared freely through Dowan's medical networks and Hana's trade contacts, was flowing into systems that had been neglected by the Council for centuries. Border colonies that had begged the Council for better medical equipment for decades received it from human freighters within months. Mining worlds that had been exploited by Venari trade monopolies found new markets through human merchants who offered fair prices. The galaxy was not just noticing humanity, and it was choosing humanity. Elder Puvo called a final emergency session of the full council. The Grand Hall was filled once again, all 412 species represented. But the atmosphere was nothing like the day Hana had first stood on that platform. There was no laughter. There was no amusement. There was tension so thick it pressed against the walls. Puvo stood at his balcony and spoke with the full weight of his centuries of authority. He proposed a grand coalition, a unified fleet drawn from every major council species, tasked with blockading human space permanently. He called it a containment initiative. He said it was for the safety of all civilized species. He said humanity's rapid growth was unstable and dangerous, and that if it was not stopped now, it would consume the galaxy. He called for a vote. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then Talsi stood. She had never addressed the full council before. She was not senior enough. She did not have the rank or the reputation or the centuries of experience that the other speakers had. She was a junior aide who had spent most of her career writing reports that no one read. But she stood, and the hall let her speak. "I have served this council for 33 years, she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence of the hall, every word carried. 33 years ago, I watched a human woman stand on that platform and ask for nothing more than to be treated as a neighbor. You laughed at her. I was there. I heard it." She paused and looked up at Puvo. He did not interrupt her. "I wrote reports. I warned this council that humans were not what you believed them to be. I showed data. I showed projections. I showed evidence that they were growing faster than any species in recorded history. Every report was filed and forgotten. Every warning was dismissed." Her voice grew steadier. "You did not fear them when you should have respected them. And now you fear them for the wrong reasons. Humans did not attack us. We attacked them. We captured their people. We besieged their colony. We fired on their schools and their homes. And still, they left our soldiers alive. They disassembled weapons instead of using them. They sent doctors to our border stations. They shared technology with species we had ignored for centuries." She turned to face the full hall. "Humans are not a threat to be contained. They are a mirror. And what we see in that mirror is every failure, every arrogance, every cruelty that this council has practiced for 10,000 years and called civilization." She sat down. The hall was completely silent. The vote was called. The Grand Coalition proposal failed. 261 species voted against it, and many of them had already tasted what human partnership felt like, and they were not willing to give it up for a war started by Puvo's pride. Puvo sat motionless in his chair as the results were displayed. He said nothing. For the first time in 200 years, his authority meant nothing. 3 days later, Hana returned to the Grand Hall. She walked the same path she had walked 31 years ago, across the same platform, under the same cold white light. But this time she did not come alone. Behind her stood Taiho, Yuna, Jinseo, and Dawan, the 5 people who had quietly reshaped the galaxy while the galaxy was not watching. Hana did not plead. She did not ask for permission. She stood straight and spoke clearly. 31 years ago, I came to this hall and asked to be your neighbor. You said no. Today, I am not asking. I am offering. She paused and let the words settle. Humanity proposes a new framework for galactic cooperation, not the old hierarchy, not a system where ancient species sit above and younger species kneel below. A true coalition of equals, open borders, shared research, mutual defense, every species with a voice, every species with a vote. No more classifications, no more levels, no more minor species. She looked directly at Puvo. You are welcome to join. All of you. Even those who laughed. The vote was immediate. 307 species voted in favor. It was the largest majority in the history of the Council. They called it the Soul Accord. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed faster than it had in millennia. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to build new research stations. Human doctors set up clinics on worlds that had never had proper medical care. Human ships flew beside alien ships on the first joint patrols under the new coalition. Mixed crews learning to trust each other one shift at a time. On the Baiho, Taiho stood on the bridge and watched through the viewport as a formation of human and alien ships moved together through open space. The ships were different shapes and sizes, built by different hands on different worlds, but they flew in formation as if they had been doing it for years. Yuna stood beside him with her arms crossed, watching the tactical display out of habit. Even now, she was counting response times and evaluating angles of approach. Some things never changed. Jinseo was in the engine room. An alien engineer from one of the new coalition species had given him a component from their propulsion system as a gift. Jinseo had been taking it apart and putting it back together for 3 hours. He was grinning like a child. Dawan was in the med bay treating a Venari crew member who had burned his hand on a power coupling. The Venari was young and clearly nervous about being treated by a human. Dawan cleaned the burn, wrapped it carefully, and told him a joke about a farmer and a broken tractor. The Venari did not understand the joke, but he laughed anyway because Dawan was laughing, and laughter was one of those things that did not need translation. Hana's voice came over the comms from the council station. Taiho, they finalized the name. They are calling it the Soul Accord. Thought you would want to know. Taiho smiled. It was a rare thing, that smile. Yuna noticed it and said nothing. Tell them we are honored, Taiho said. He paused. Outside the viewport, the joint fleet moved together through the stars, human and alien, side by side, heading toward something none of them had ever seen before. And tell them we are just getting started. The galaxy had laughed at them once, a small species from a small world, standing alone on a platform in a hall full of giants, asking only to be seen. The giants had laughed and turned away, a break, and it had trembled at the thought break, and it had trembled at the thought of what they might become. And now, at last, the galaxy pursued them. Not to destroy, not to contain, not to study them like animals in a cage, but because for the first time in 10,000 years of civilized history, someone had shown them something that no ancient empire, no elder council, no mighty fleet had ever offered, a future worth running toward, together.